Welcome to CJC Adventures. Carl here, Craig's with me today, and we're heading back to 1922 and we're going to take a look at one of the worst disasters in Tipton's history, as in 1922 an explosion happened at an ammunitions factory. It was an awful disaster, and it's something that the town looks back on sadly but with respect, and I'm going to take you back to that year and discuss the history of the terrible disaster of what happened in Dudleyport, Tipton. And on that day, lots of people lost their lives, young people. So we're going to discuss it now, and here is the history of that awful disaster. The Tipton catastrophe, or Dudleyport explosion, was a 1922 munitions explosion in the South Staffordshire town of Tipton, England, in which 19 teenage girls working in an unlicensed and unsafe factory died. The works head manager was imprisoned for manslaughter. After World War I, millions of surplus rifle cartridges remained in British Army stock. 45 million rounds of .22 ammunition were purchased by the Premier Aluminium Casting Company Limited of Hay Mills, Birmingham, who were licensed to process them to recover their scrap metal. A condition of the licence was that the factory where the work was undertaken was inspected for suitability of its premises and safety processes, such as the avoidance of naked flames and isolating workers from each other in groups of 2 or 3. It was usual for workers in such licensed premises to be required to wear shoes without nails to avoid sparks and non-flammable clothing. Premier Aluminium Casting resold about 160 tons of the ammunition for dismantling at premises owned by Louisa Kate Knowles in Groveland Road, Dudleyport, Tipton. On the 6th of March 1922, an explosion occurred at Knowles' workshop, detonating a large quantity of the cartridges. 19 of the 24 workers present, all teenagers, one being 13 years old, one 16, and the rest 14 or 15, were killed, some after suffering horrendous injuries and burning. Thousands of onlookers gathered at the site. The injured and dying were taken to the guest hospital in nearby Dudley, which was stretched to capacity as a result. The event was reported in cinema newsreels and was discussed in Parliament, not least by a local member of Parliament. The remaining ammunition, said to be worth 2,800, which is an equivalent of £162,662 as of 2021, was seized by the authorities. The factory owner's husband and its head manager, John Walter Knowles, aged 55, and the works manager, James Richard Chadwick, were tried for manslaughter at Stafford Assizes before Mr. Justice Shearman. The 2-day trial opened on the 10th of July 1922. Knowles, who was represented by Henry Curtis Bennett, was sentenced to 5 years' imprisonment, and Chadwick acquitted. It transpired that Knowles had previous convictions for receiving stolen metal and the contravening of the Factory Act. In summing up, Shearman said it had been the worst case of manslaughter he had had to deal with. 23 civil cases were also brought against the perpetrators. Fleming's primary report was published on the 12th of July, and the final report was published on the 8th of November. It was revealed that the factory, as an unauthorised subcontractor, was a licensed contractor and was not licensed to carry out such work. and thus had never been inspected for its suitability to do so. The victims had worn their own clothing and shoes, and the workshop, which had a concrete floor, was heated by an open stove and a fire. No safety precautions had been taken at the time. Letters were sent out to the victims' families from representatives of the King of England with condolences, stating that we are sorry for your loss. Tipton has a rich history of black country industry and was one of the largest manufacturers of any place in Great Britain. But sadly, this disaster overshadowed how cruel the workplace can actually be with this sad loss of life. It's something that will go into the history books of disastrous industry accidents from someone's catastrophic mistake of employing workers that clearly weren't protected. A memorial stands in Tipton Cemetery in Alexander Road and has the names of the victims and those what survived and those what didn't. It will stand for all time that this disaster should never have happened. And that's everything about that terrible day in 1922 when 19 teenage girls sadly lost their lives. And what an horrible, display of, mindless health and safety procedures. I know there was no health and safety procedures back then, but obviously, it would take some care even back in those days. But, things like that happen, don't they? Not so much today, gladly, but back then there was an occurring thing all around the country, and Tipton saw its fair share with that day in that year. So we're going to take a look at some of the places still, recognised today. They look a lot different, but we're going to take a look around Dudley Port and see, some of the respectful places of where it happened. So let's go and see what we can see. Well, this is Groveland Road, and this is the road where that terrible day, that explosion at the time happened. Now, of course, think of it what you will, it's been a long time ago, but it's something that you should never forget, really. I mean, if you look, this whole place has literally changed beyond recognition. But it's to be within this area where the actual works was, Knowles, and, obviously it was a bomb going off, wasn't it, really, or bombs going off. It was ammunition. That's what ammunition does, and not enough safety precautions were taken. And of course, in those days, you'd just have checks and stuff like that, you would have checks come, but nothing was probably ever really properly signed off like it was today. And today, you've got all sorts of, protection, and you probably even wouldn't dismantle ammunition like you did today. But it was in this area where it all happened in Dudley Port. And of course, over time, people have mentioned it since, but like with disasters, people just want to forget, don't they, and just, remember the people what died, and, remembering those people is really nice, but at the same time, it will always stay in all the record books of, if you look back in the record books, you look online, you can look in history books of places such as Tipton, Dudley Port, and you'll find that terrible disaster. Now the road that you see there would have probably still been there back in 1922, and when it happened they actually flagged down passers-by in vehicles or what vehicles was around on the day, and then they shipped them up to, you know, what survivors there were, and those that were still, you know, fighting for life, they would have gone up to Dudley Guest Hospital along this road and up towards Dudley. And as you can see, there's a sign there what says Dudley 1 mile. That was the nearest hospital at the time, and we're just going to go and have a little look now at what remains of Dudley Guest Hospital. So we're going to head up there now. We've now come to the former Guest Hospital on the Tipton Road in Dudley. Now this was where they brought the victims of the disaster, and they would pretty much be stretched to the limit right here at the Guest. And you know, you'd had patients coming in left, right and centre, and it must have been an awful time, especially for like the staff and everyone at that time, because things, you know, were a lot slower because of roads. You know, I mean, transport wasn't as fast as it is now, and just getting here, you know, would have been, you know, a time process, if you like. But this was where it was all bought. I mean, it does still look the same. These days it's just apartments and whatnot, you know, people what live here, and you know, they've been turned into. It's had a lot done to it, but it still looks the same. You know, a lot of the buildings at the back have been removed, but this was where, you know, they would have all come, and you could imagine the chaos at the time, couldn't you? I mean, I know hospitals go through that, but that would be, at the time, you know, a pretty awful experience, especially for, you know, younger people being hurt in such a terrible disaster. Now just off to the right of that building is the building that you can see here. Now this was here at the time. It's all housing now around here, you know, it's all been turned into streets and new housing, but this was actually here at the time. And to the left of it was the accident and emergency department. Now that was just there where you can see that wall and the housing, but it was all along there, and that would be where they would have brought those victims of the disaster at the time. They would have brought them there, and that was where they would have took them into, you know, what would they say, resus at the time. You know, I mean, today you've got Russell's Hall Hospital just up the road from here. That is the main hospital. That would be where you would be taken today, but back then this was literally the nearest one here on the Tipton Road. But you know, it doesn't bear thinking about, does it, at the time, you know, what they all went through. Really awful time. And we're now at Tipton Cemetery, where we're going to pay our respects at the memorial stone which is erected here for all of the young people what was tragically taken on that terrible day. So we're going to head in now and take a look. And that is the memorial to the ones that were lost on that day, and the ones that actually survived and went on to live up to when they passed away. Sad really, but it's all remembered right here in Tipton. And that's it for today on CJC Adventures. It's so surreal, isn't it? You know, after all this time. But like anything in life, you just have to go along with it and, you know, remember. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe and please share. And until next time, look after yourselves and each other. Goodbye for now.